Virgil Henshaw knew the lines of Ironwood Ranch better than most men know the contours of their own faces. He'd been born there, raised there, and after the war, he came home and never left. Some people wondered. Virgil rooted. For him, that stretch of dry earth and mesquite wasn't just land. It was memory. It was family. It was the last part of his father's voice that hadn't faded with time. The ranch sat just outside the formal edge of the Hickory Hills development, a sprawling master plan community built a full 50 years after Virgil's grandfather first staked out the fence posts. Hickory Hills was everything Ironwood wasn't: symmetrical, painted in HOA-approved hues, rigidly regulated by rules no one remembered agreeing to. Where Ironwood breathed with dust and oak and the smell of cattle, Hickory Hills inhaled the faint scent of latex paint and artificial turf. They were neighbors only on paper. Virgil didn't resent them. He didn't think about them at all. Until the letter came. It arrived in a crisp white envelope with the Hickory Hills HOA logo stamped on the corner. Inside was a notice, formal, multi-paragraph, and entirely unexpected. It informed him that his newly built barn, a structure he and his nephews had spent 3 months erecting with timber sourced from his own land, was non-compliant with local zoning aesthetics. The letter stated he had 30 days to remove it. He read it twice. Then he folded it up, walked outside, and spit in the dirt. That barn wasn't just a shelter for equipment. It was a tribute to his brother, who died 10 years earlier. It had his initials carved into the baseboard. Virgil had built it not because he needed more storage, but because some things you build just to remember. So, when he saw the demand, signed by a woman named Louisa Sutter, president of the Hickory Hills Homeowners Association, he didn't get mad. He got ready. The next morning, he drove his truck into Hickory Hills, parked next to a manicured roundabout, and walked into the HOA office. The receptionist greeted him with a tight smile. "Can I help you? I'm here to speak to Louisa Sutter," he said. "Is she expecting you?" "No, but I'm expecting her." She went pale. 10 minutes later, Louisa emerged from a side door wearing a silk blouse, a fitted pencil skirt, and the expression of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Henshaw," she said, trying to sound pleasant. "I assume you're here about the compliance notice." Virgil didn't sit. "I don't live in Hickory Hills," he said. "Your rules don't apply to me." Louisa gestured for him to sit anyway. He didn't move. "We've recently entered into a transitional annexation agreement with the county," she said. "Under this arrangement, properties within a defined expansion zone are considered subject to Hickory Hills regulatory oversight. That includes Ironwood Ranch." "No, it doesn't," he said flatly. She smiled. "I think you'll find it does." Virgil left without another word. But inside, the fire had already caught. The following week, 2 men in khaki vests marked HOA inspector were spotted on Ironwood property, snapping photos near the barn. Virgil caught them before they reached the well. "This is private land," he said, shotgun in hand but barrel down. One of them stuttered something about jurisdiction. Virgil just pointed at the fence. "That line's older than both of you. Cross it again, you won't like what happens." He called the sheriff anyway. The deputy arrived, asked to see the HOA paperwork, and when Virgil handed over the original deed to Ironwood Ranch, signed in ink so old it was nearly brown, the deputy nodded. "They don't have authority here," he said. "If they come back, call us." They didn't stop. The thing about a legal threat is that it doesn't come like a gunshot. It comes like a drip. Slow. Repetitive. Numbing. That's how it started for Virgil Henshaw. Not with a sheriff knocking or a bulldozer humming down the county road. It started with paperwork, thick envelopes. Stamped. Certified. Delivered with precision. Inside, citations, compliance notices, demand letters. They all bore the same seal, Hickory Hills Homeowners Association, and the same tone, firm, impersonal, and smug. Most of them were signed by Louisa Sutter. At first, Virgil ignored them. Then he read them. Then he read them again. The words were wrapped in legal phrases. Jurisdictional reclassification, aesthetic compliance enforcement, reclamation under zoning clause 4B. But stripped of the language, the message was plain: tear down your barn. Or we'll tear you down. The barn had no plumbing. No lighting. It wasn't commercial. It wasn't even visible from the road unless you knew where to look. But the HOA had decided it was incompatible with the visual harmony of the surrounding area. Which made no sense, because Ironwood Ranch wasn't in the HOA. Not by vote. Not by charter. Not by law. That's what set Virgil off more than anything. He hadn't signed anything. Hadn't agreed to anything. No ballot. No consent. Yet here they were, marching their rules across his boundary like a conquering army. At night, he'd walk the fence line in silence, not because he expected trouble, but because he felt it. It was one of his nieces who gave him Grace Hollister's name. "She's mean in a courtroom," the niece said, almost proud. "She used to work for the developers. Then she flipped. Now she eats him alive." Virgil dialed her number on a Sunday. She picked up on the third ring, her voice flat and direct. "This is Grace." He explained the situation in just a few sentences. "They want me to tear down a barn. Say I'm under HOA rules. I'm not. But they're coming anyway." Grace didn't ask him if he was sure. She asked for the parcel number. Underscore 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 within 48 hours. She was standing on ironwood soil, boots in the dirt, file folders under her arm, sunglasses pushed up over graying hair. She shook Virgil's hand and said, "Let's go see what they're trying to steal." He showed her everything, the original deed, handwritten maps from his grandfather, the updated tax plat, and every letter Louisa had sent. Grace flipped through the papers, scanning them like a codebreaker. "This annexation they're citing," she said, "was filed improperly. They skipped the review hearing. That makes the land grab invalid. Illegal, even. What do they get if they win?" Virgil asked. She looked out over the north pasture. "About $8 million in future development rights." That hit like a shovel to the chest. They weren't trying to fine him. They weren't mad about a barn. They were trying to choke him into compliance so they could take his land, 1 acre at a time. "They won't stop," she said. "You'll have to push back hard." Virgil didn't hesitate. "Then let's push." Grace didn't waste time. Within 2 days of reviewing Virgil's deed, she filed an injunction with the county clerk to block any enforcement actions from the Hickory Hills HOA. That bought them a few weeks, breathing room. Not peace. The HOA responded by doubling down. Virgil started getting mail daily. Not just letters now, but warnings posted to his gate, some delivered by hand. One morning he stepped outside to find a laminated, "Stop work," order stapled to his barn door. An order with no legal seal, no signature, no jurisdiction. Just red ink and intimidation. He tore it down and burned it in a coffee can. Grace was unfazed. She expected it. "They're testing you," she said. "Seeing if you'll blink first." He didn't. But he was starting to see what they were willing to do. 3 of his water troughs were drained one morning. Then a portion of his west fence was cut, clean, like with bolt cutters. Then came the anonymous complaints to the agricultural board about unlicensed land use, which triggered an inspection. The state rep apologized the moment he stepped foot on the property and saw how absurd the claim was. But the message was clear. The HOA wasn't just going to use lawsuits. They were going to wear him down. Underscore 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 underscore. That's when Grace called Jim Calloway. "You want a story?" she asked over the phone. "I've got a rancher, a forged annexation plan, and a local HOA acting like a land cartel." Jim was already moving. He met Virgil 2 days later, flannel shirt, camera crew in tow, notepad in hand. He wasn't flashy, but his voice had weight. He was the kind of reporter who didn't chase stories. He built them brick by brick. Virgil didn't want the attention at first, but Grace made it clear. "Sunlight's the best disinfectant." So they walked the ranch. Virgil explained the history, showed the documents, the broken fence, the fake citations. Jim nodded. Asked a few sharp questions. Then he asked the one that mattered. "Why fight this hard?" Virgil stared out at the field, the barn behind him, and said, "Because my father built this land with his hands. My grandfather carved the creek before the county ever paved a road out here. And now someone in a boardroom thinks they can take it from me because it fits their 5-year plan. No, sir. This is my line. I'm not moving." Jim didn't say a word. He just kept filming. Underscore 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 underscore. Back in town, Jim started digging through public records, planning meetings, zoning board minutes, HOA fund allocation reports. What he found was worse than Grace expected. A memo referencing cooperative development parcels dated before the annexation vote, draft blueprints for a Greenview Estates expansion that included Ironwood Ranch as a planned public park, budget proposal showing tens of thousands in land acquisition coordination fees paid to a third-party consultant with ties to Hickory Hills board. It wasn't just dirty. It was calculated. The HOA hadn't just overreached. They'd drawn up an entire fantasy development on land they didn't own because they assumed Virgil Henshaw would fold like everyone else had, but he hadn't, and now it was going public. The segment aired on a Tuesday night, sandwiched between weather updates and election noise. But within 24 hours, it was the most viewed clip Channel 5 had uploaded in 2 years. Jim Calloway's voice, calm and deliberate, carried across Texas living rooms. One man, one barn, one boundary line, versus an entire HOA board backed by developers, and a whispered land grab plan. The visuals were damning, footage of the fake citations. A close-up of the cut fence line. The internal HOA emails Jim had pulled, now shown on screen. Ironwood is priority acquisition. Use zoning tools to motivate exit. If he won't comply, cite violations until pressure mounts. Louisa Sutter refused to go on camera. Her office issued a generic denial. But the damage was done. Grace Hollister filed a motion for summary dismissal of the HOA's claim the next morning, citing fraudulent intent and procedural misconduct. The judge didn't grant it outright, but he did call an emergency hearing. And for the first time, Virgil walked into court not as the one being accused, but as the one bringing fire with him. Underscore 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 underscore. Inside the courthouse, Grace was surgical. She presented deed history, original, uncontested boundaries, going back 97 years. She cross-referenced public zoning maps, with the so-called annexation overlays used by the HOA. Then she walked the court through the exact steps of the fraudulent plan, from fabricated neighbor approvals to silent campaign funding. At one point, she turned to the judge and said, "What we have here isn't enforcement, it's attempted theft dressed as regulation." The judge asked the HOA's counsel one question. "Do you have any record showing Mr. Henshaw opted into this HOA by vote or sale?" The lawyer said no, that was it. The judge issued a restraining order against the HOA from sending further notices, entering the property, or interfering in any way. A court date was set to determine damages and settle the civil claim. Grace leaned to Virgil and whispered, "You just turned this into a war they can't afford." Underscore 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 underscore. Virgil didn't celebrate. He went home. He walked the barn perimeter. He repaired the west fence. Then he sat on the porch and watched the sun go down over the same bridge his grandfather used to ride along during drought seasons. The fight wasn't over, but it was no longer a quiet one. People from across the county stopped by the following weekend. One brought a pie. Another handed him a letter of support from a rural coalition out in Junction. 3 strangers just walked the property line in silence, as if trying to feel where a lie had failed to cross. Virgil greeted each of them, then got back to work, because land doesn't rest, and neither do those who guard it. The court order did more than just shut the HOA down. It put Ironwood Ranch on the map, figuratively and literally. For the first time in living memory, Virgil's land was not just protected by fences, but by precedent. The ruling wasn't just a one-off decision, it became case law. Real estate law bulletins across the state cited Henshaw versus Hickory Hills HOA in footnotes. Legal podcasts picked it up. Agricultural coalitions held seminars about it. But Virgil didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to rebuild the fence, not because it had fallen, but because now, he wanted it perfect. He measured every post by hand, replaced rails that didn't need replacing, added a new gate on the north side, with the initials WHH, William Henshaw, his grandfather's mark, carved into it thick enough to stop a truck. One afternoon, a man in a work shirt parked at the edge of the property. Virgil watched from the porch. The man got out. No clipboard. No HOA badge. Just a clipboard and a quiet face. "I saw you on the news," he said. "Didn't think anyone stood up to them and won." Virgil didn't say anything. "I've got 40 acres outside of Cedar Mill. They're trying to force me into a beautification district. Told me I had to cut down my pecan trees. I thought about giving in." "You still thinking?" Virgil asked. "Not anymore." Virgil pointed to the chair. The man sat down. They drank coffee and went through plat maps and deed books for 2 hours. That was the first op. By the end of the year, 27 different landowners, ranchers, veterans, widows, young couples, had visited Ironwood. Most just wanted to ask, "How do I fight?" Virgil gave them copies of the documents. Told them what to file, who to call, what to record, what to never say. He didn't offer inspiration. He offered blueprints. And slowly, a phrase began to circulate. "Get yourself Henshaw ready." The barn never changed colors. Virgil never painted it to match the HOA's. Preferred neutral tones. Because there was no HOA anymore. And even if there had been, he wouldn't have. That barn stood raw and real, unfinished on purpose. Weathered wood, not whitewashed timber. Nails visible, not hidden. A symbol of work done honestly, not to please someone else's sense of order. That was what drew people. Eventually, someone started calling it the line shed, not because it sat on the edge of the property, but because it represented one. A line in the sand. The place where a man said, "This far. No further." One weekend, a group of ranchers from 3 counties brought folding chairs, coolers, and printed copies of their deeds. They gathered inside the barn and went over their parcel maps together. They laughed, shared stories, exchanged strategies. A lawyer from Amarillo showed up uninvited and offered free consultations. Grace Hollister came too. She stood at the front of the group and spoke like she always did, quiet, slow, and certain. She told them exactly how the HOA tried to box Virgil out with legal gray zones, fake easements, and forced annexation tactics. "They want you confused," she told them. "Because confusion makes people hesitate. And hesitation gives them ground." Then she pointed to the barn. "That's what not hesitating looks like." Someone filmed her speech. It ended up online. Within 2 weeks, it had 320,000 views. Underscore 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 underscore. That winter, a reporter from the Texas Agricultural Record asked Virgil what he thought of all the attention. He shrugged. "All I did was stand still," he said. "They're the ones who kept trying to move." She asked if he'd ever consider going into politics, maybe running for county board or a land commission seat. He laughed once, hard. "I'd rather shoe a mule with my teeth." Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, audits into Hickory Hills uncovered more than anyone expected. It turned out the annexation attempt on Ironwood was just one piece of a bigger plan, dubbed Expansion Strip 9. It included 8 properties, all held by families who'd resisted HOA involvement. All were targeted using similar tactics: false violation notices, manipulated zoning data, and in 2 cases, unrecorded transfer of jurisdiction memos that were completely made up. The county filed charges. 3 former HOA board members were indicted for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. 1 fled the state. Louisa Sutter pled no contest and received 3 years probation, a $100,000 fine, and was banned from holding any administrative position in a planned community again. Virgil never said her name again. He didn't need to. The following spring, Virgil planted wildflowers. He didn't tell anyone. He just picked a stretch of field between the barn and the old sycamore and scattered the seeds by hand. Bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, little prairie asters. His father once said, "Don't plant anything you wouldn't want to outlive you." So he planted them all, and they did. That spring, the barn stood in a sea of color. The news stopped calling by then. The legal cases had settled. The HOA was long gone. Hickory Hills, stripped of its board, was now just a collection of quiet houses with neighbors who look each other in the eye more often. Some of the same people who once sided with Louisa now brought Virgil homemade bread. A couple apologized outright. He accepted. Didn't forget, but he accepted. Zach, a teenager from down the road, started working part-time at Ironwood. Virgil taught him how to mend fences, grease tractor axles, and how to tell the difference between a legitimate code inspector and someone just waving a clipboard. "You don't need to yell to win," Virgil told him one day. "You just need to know where your line is and not step back." Zach repeated that at a county fair speech 3 years later. Won a scholarship for it. Underscore 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 underscore. Virgil lived another 6 years after the final court order. He never left the ranch. Never stopped tending the same fields his grandfather cleared. Never painted the barn. When he passed, quietly, in his sleep on a clear October night, the county clerk received 2 requests before sunrise. 1. That Ironwood Ranch be recognized as a historic agricultural landmark. 2. That the barn remain exactly as it is, unaltered, unclaimed, unpainted. Both passed unanimously. Today, Ironwood still stands. The barn is still there. A plaque marks the property line with 6 simple words. This land said no. It meant it. Students come from the university to study land use law and property rights. They walk the field, study the old zoning files, and learn how something so small, one man, one fence, one barn, can stop an empire built on quiet intimidation. They don't always understand how he did it, but the flowers still bloom every spring, and that's answer enough.